The moment you start explaining every decision you make, you begin losing authority, not because your decision is wrong, but because you feel it needs approval. Most people don't realize this. They think explaining themselves makes them understood. But in reality, it slowly teaches others that your position can be questioned. Watch how it happens. A simple choice. A simple no, followed by 3 sentences of justification nobody asked for. And once your position becomes something that must always be defended, respect begins to fade. Marcus Aurelius understood something most people miss. You cannot control how others interpret your actions, but you can control how much you give them to argue with. He ruled an empire surrounded by people who wanted answers. Senators who demanded reasons. Generals who questioned his orders. Critics who waited for him to defend himself. And yet, the most powerful man in Rome rarely explained anything. So he chose clarity over explanation, presence over justification, because a strong mind does not chase understanding. It stands firm in what it knows is right. And in this documentary, you will learn why the people who explain themselves the least are often the ones respected the most. Let's begin. The more you explain yourself, the more you lose respect. Not because your reasoning is wrong, but because you are training people to question your decisions. Most people don't realize this, because it feels like they are simply being clear. But every unnecessary explanation adds another layer of doubt to your authority. Instead of your decision standing on its own, it begins to rely on your words. And once your words become the support system for every choice you make, your presence becomes weaker. People no longer feel your certainty. They feel your hesitation. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. A coworker asks why you didn't volunteer for the extra project. You could simply say, "I already have enough on my plate." But instead, you explain your entire week, your deadlines, your personal schedule, your reasons, one after another. By the time you finish speaking, the decision no longer feels like yours. It feels like something you were asking permission for. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. A man who is certain does not surround his choices with endless justification. He allows his actions to speak first, and his words to remain few. As emperor, he was surrounded by people who wanted reasons for everything. Why he chose one general over another, why he delayed a campaign, why he showed mercy to an enemy. If he had stopped to justify every decision to every voice in the Senate, he would have spent his entire reign defending himself instead of leading. So he didn't. He made the decision and allowed the decision to stand. Because when you explain too much, you are no longer leading your life. You are negotiating it. And people always sense when someone is negotiating their own decisions. Even if they cannot explain why, there is a difference between informing someone and convincing them. Informing is brief. It gives the necessary facts and stops. Convincing is endless. Because the moment you start trying to win someone over, there will always be another objection waiting behind the last one. That is where respect begins to fade. Not in one dramatic moment, but in countless small explanations, until your authority no longer feels natural. It feels performed, and once people sense performance, they stop following your presence and start watching your reactions instead, waiting to see what they can push against next. At first, over-explaining feels harmless. It feels polite. It feels responsible. It feels like you are being clear. But slowly, something begins to change. People stop hearing your message and start focusing on how you defend it. Instead of your decision being accepted as final, it becomes something they expect you to justify. And the more you justify it, the more you reinforce the idea that it needs justification. This is where a quiet shift happens. Your authority quietly begins to weaken, not because people are attacking you, but because you are opening the door for constant discussion. Even simple moments reveal it. You say no, and immediately follow it with an explanation. I can't because I'm busy. I have things to do. Maybe another time. And suddenly your no is no longer a boundary. It becomes a conversation. It happens online too. You post something honest, and a stranger disagrees. And instead of letting your word stand, you write 3 more paragraphs defending the first one. Now you are not sharing a thought anymore. You are managing a courtroom, arguing a case to people who were never going to be satisfied either way. It happens at home too. You set a rule for your own household, and the moment someone questions it, you over-explain instead of simply repeating it. A child, a partner, a sibling, they don't need a lecture about your reasoning. They need to see that the rule does not move. Because rules that bend under questioning were never really rules. They were suggestions waiting for permission. Marcus Aurelius understood something most people overlook. When you feel the need to constantly justify your position, you are no longer acting from inner certainty. You are reacting to how others might perceive you. And once that happens, your decisions stop feeling grounded and start feeling like they are still up for debate. This is how respect begins to shift. Not through one big mistake, but through repeated moments of over-explaining, until people no longer sense firmness in you. They sense availability, and availability without boundaries is always taken for granted. To understand why this man valued silence over explanation, you have to understand the world he lived in. In the year 161, Marcus Aurelius became emperor of Rome, not because he fought for the throne, but because he was raised for it, trained for it, prepared for a role he never personally chased. From the moment he took power, he was surrounded by people demanding his attention. Senators who wanted explanations for every policy, generals who wanted justification for every order, court advisors who wanted reassurance for every decision. If he had tried to satisfy all of them, he would have spent his reign defending himself instead of governing. So instead, he turned inward, each night, by lamplight, far from the noise of the Senate. He wrote to himself, not speeches, not declarations, not explanations meant for an audience, just private reminders, written only for his own mind. That collection of notes became what we now call meditations. A book never meant to be published, never meant to convince anyone of anything. And that detail matters more than people realize. He wasn't performing wisdom for the public. He was disciplining his own thinking in private. While Rome expected constant reassurance from him, plague spreading through the empire, war pressing against the northern borders, a co-emperor who lived very differently than he did, Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the same idea. You do not owe the world a constant account of your reasoning. You owe yourself a mind that does not need one. He led armies on the frontier for years, away from the comfort of the capital, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. without the luxury of explaining himself to everyone who disagreed. Because leadership, real leadership, was never about being understood by every voice around him. It was about remaining steady regardless of who understood him. This is the man behind the philosophy you are hearing tonight. Not a theorist removed from pressure, but a ruler who lived inside constant pressure and chose silence and consistency over explanation and persuasion. If he had needed everyone's approval, the empire would have collapsed under the weight of his own hesitation. Instead, he became one of the most respected rulers in history, not because he convinced people he was right, but because he never needed to. This same principle applies far beyond an empire. Whether you are leading a team, raising a family, running a business, or simply trying to hold a boundary with the people closest to you, the lesson is the same. The people around you do not need a transcript of your reasoning. They need to see that your decisions are not up for renegotiation every time someone disagrees. Marcus Aurelius was not naturally immune to doubt. His writings reveal a man who wrestled with frustration, who grew tired of difficult people, who questioned his own patience more than once. But he kept returning to the same discipline. Write it down, process it privately, and act with composure publicly. Not because he didn't feel the pressure to explain himself, but because he understood what explaining himself would cost. Every time he paused to justify himself to every critic in Rome, he would have handed away a piece of his authority. So he protected it, quietly, consistently, without announcement. And almost 2,000 years later, his private notebook is still being read by people who are not emperors, not generals, not senators, just people trying to learn the same lesson he was teaching himself. That a mind anchored in its own clarity does not need to be explained to be respected. At this point, something important becomes clear. It is not that people respect those who stay silent. It is that they respect those who are not controlled by reaction. Because over-explaining is not really about communication. It is about seeking approval in real time. You are not just explaining your actions. You are trying to manage how they are received. And that changes everything. A calm and grounded person does not operate like this. They make a decision, and they allow it to exist. They do not rush to correct misunderstandings. They do not chase approval after speaking. They do not fill silence with justification. They understand something simple. Not everyone needs access to your reasoning, and not every opinion deserves your response. Picture someone in a leadership position, announcing a difficult decision to their team. One version stands at the front of the room, states the decision once, answers genuine questions briefly, and moves forward. The other version spends 20 minutes pre-defending the decision before anyone has even reacted, apologizing in advance, softening every sentence, asking for understanding before it has even been challenged. Both people may have made the exact same decision, but only one of them will walk out of that room with their authority intact. The other one has already told the room, without saying it directly, that this decision is open for debate. Marcus Aurelius lived by this principle. He did not treat every criticism as something that required correction. He did not see misunderstanding as something dangerous. He saw it as irrelevant noise, because when your mind is anchored in certainty, you do not become unstable when others misinterpret you. You remain steady, and that steadiness is what people feel. They may not always agree with you, but they begin to recognize something in you that is rare. A person who is not easily moved. And this is where respect begins to shift. Because people are not drawn to those who constantly react. They are drawn to those who remain composed under pressure. The more you explain yourself unnecessarily, the more you reveal that your emotions are tied to perception. But the less you explain, the more your presence communicates control. Not loud control, not forced control, but quiet internal control. And that is what people respond to most. Not perfect arguments, but unshakable calmness. You see this same pattern in people who perform under public pressure. An athlete who misses a shot, a public figure who receives criticism, a leader who makes an unpopular call. The ones who last are rarely the ones explaining themselves after every mistake. They take the hit, they adjust quietly, and they let their next action speak instead of their next statement. The ones who don't last are often caught in an endless cycle of clarifying, defending, and re-explaining themselves to an audience that was never going to stop watching for the next reaction. Control is not about never being questioned. Control is about not needing the question answered to remain steady. When you stop over-explaining yourself, something uncomfortable happens at first. People may push back. They may question you more. They may even try to pull you back into old patterns because they are used to a version of you that always responds, always defends, always explains. But when that version disappears, they feel the shift. Imagine a family member who has grown used to your long apologies and endless justifications. Now you give a short, calm answer instead, and stop there. They pause, confused. They may ask, "Is that all you have to say?" They may even get frustrated, not because your answer was wrong, but because it removed the opening they were used to, the space where they could keep you talking, keep you defending, keep you explaining yourself until they feel satisfied. This is where most people fail. They confuse discomfort for disrespect, and they start explaining again. But Marcus Aurelius teaches a different response. Do not let external reactions shape your internal state. Because the moment you adjust yourself based on how others respond, you are no longer in control of your character. You are reacting to it. A strong person does not abandon clarity just because others resist it. They remain consistent, even when misunderstood, especially when misunderstood, because understanding is not your responsibility. Clarity of action is, and over time, something powerful happens. People begin to adjust to your boundaries. Instead of expecting you to adjust to their expectations, not because you became aggressive, but because you became consistent. And consistency creates certainty, and certainty creates respect, even from people who do not fully understand you, because humans naturally respond to stability more than explanation. And when your behavior becomes stable, your presence becomes harder to challenge, not because you are louder, but because you are no longer available for unnecessary negotiation. The people who test you the most during this stage are often the ones who benefited most from your old habit of over-explaining. They are not testing whether you are right. They are testing whether the old version of you will come back. And every time you stay steady, you prove, not to them, but to yourself, that it won't. The real damage of over-explaining is not just how others treat you. It is how you begin to see yourself. At first, you think you are just being clear, being responsible, being polite. But over time, something subtle begins to change inside you. You start doubting your own decisions. Because if you constantly feel the need to explain yourself, you slowly begin believing your choices are not strong enough on their own. And once that belief takes root, you stop trusting your own judgment. You begin anticipating objections before they even happen, building explanations before anyone has asked a single question, living in reaction instead of intention. Some people carry entire conversations in their minds before they ever happen, rehearsing explanations, preparing defenses, imagining arguments, walking into a room already defending a decision that no one in that room cares about as much as they do. That is not preparation. It is exhaustion disguised as readiness. Marcus Aurelius warned against this kind of dependence. A mind that is constantly shaped by external reactions is a mind that has lost its center. Because when you rely too heavily on being understood, you slowly lose the ability to stand firmly in what you already know is right. And that creates a different kind of exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion. The fatigue that comes from constantly editing yourself, trying to make your life acceptable to everyone around you. You replay conversations. You think of better explanations. You soften your truth. You search for words that will make your decisions easier for other people to accept. But in doing so, you slowly abandon the simplicity of your own mind. And a simple mind is a strong mind. A mind that does not over-justify, does not over-defend, does not over-explain, is a mind that remains steady. And that steadiness creates presence. Because when you are no longer trying to be understood by everyone, you finally become understandable to yourself. That is where real confidence begins. Not in proving your choices, but in no longer needing to prove them at all. The irony is this: the more energy you spend trying to be understood by others, the less energy you have left to understand yourself. And the moment you redirect that energy inward, your decisions stop needing an outside audience to feel valid. They simply become your decisions, made with clarity, held with discipline, and carried with quiet confidence. The moment you stop over-explaining, you will feel uncomfortable at first, because silence feels unnatural. When you have spent years defending yourself, you may feel the urge to fill the silence, to justify, to clarify, to soften your position. But this is exactly where change begins. Because every time you resist that urge, you are reshaping your identity. You are teaching yourself that your words do not need constant support to have value. Think of it like training a muscle, one that has been ignored for years. The first few times you refuse to over-explain, it feels awkward, unnatural, almost wrong. You will want to return to the old habit, just as a tired muscle wants to give up during training. But discipline is never built in moments that feel easy. It is built in the moments that challenge you. At first, people may respond differently. Some will push harder. Some will test your boundaries. Some will try to pull you back into the version of yourself they were comfortable with. But that is not a sign that you are failing. It is a test of your consistency. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. Transformation is never proven by what you say. It is proven by what you continue to do. Anyone can appear strong when life is comfortable. But real strength reveals itself when pressure invites you to return to old habits and you quietly refuse. This is where many people give up. They mistake discomfort for danger. So they begin explaining themselves again, trying to restore the comfort they once had. But the Stoic path is different. It teaches you to remain steady, even when the people around you expect you to change. Because what you are building is far greater than better communication. You are building a stronger identity, a version of yourself that does not react emotionally to every question, does not feel responsible for every misunderstanding, does not crumble because someone disagrees. Instead, you begin carrying yourself differently. Calm, steady, certain, and people notice, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped giving your authority away. One explanation at a time. This is where respect begins to feel natural. People stop trying to negotiate with you because they sense there is nothing left to negotiate. Not because you became cold, not because you became aggressive, but because you became consistent. It will not happen overnight. It will not happen after one conversation. It happens the way every lasting transformation happens. Through repetition, through quiet discipline, choosing silence over unnecessary explanation, again and again, until it no longer feels like something you are trying to do. It simply becomes who you are. At this stage, something inside you begins to change permanently. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself the way you once did. Not because you are suppressing your voice, but because you no longer see value in unnecessary justification. You begin to notice something powerful. The less you explain, the more stable your presence becomes. People stop pulling you into debates. They stop expecting lengthy justifications. They begin accepting your words as final, not because you forced them to, but because you consistently showed them. Marcus Aurelius taught that a person's character is revealed through consistency, not through explanation. Because anyone can argue their position, but only a disciplined mind can hold its position without becoming emotionally dependent on the opinions of others. And this is where transformation reaches its final stage. You stop reacting to every question. You stop trying to be perfectly understood. You stop carrying responsibility for how other people interpret your choices. Instead, you begin operating from clarity. You speak when it is necessary. You remain silent when it is not. And you allow your actions to carry the weight of your character. Over time, something undeniable begins to happen. You become harder to misread, not because you explain yourself more, but because you finally stopped explaining everything. People begin to notice the difference. They sense calmness where there used to be defensiveness, certainty where there used to be hesitation, strength where there used to be approval-seeking. This is what Stoicism has always aimed to cultivate. Not control over other people, but complete mastery over yourself. And when you reach that state, you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth, because your presence already communicates it. Quietly, consistently, without effort. Notice how this appears in the smallest moments of everyday life. A simple, "I've made my decision," instead of 3 paragraphs of explanation. A calm pause, instead of rushing to clarify yourself. A quiet, "That's not something I need to discuss," instead of becoming defensive. None of these moments require you to raise your voice. None of them require you to prove anything. They simply require you to stop giving away your authority, one sentence at a time. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is this: the less you try to be understood, the more people begin to understand you. Because what they were responding to all along was never your explanations. It was your certainty. In the end, people will not remember how much you explained yourself. They will remember how you carried yourself. Calm, steady, unshaken. Because respect is not built through endless justification. It is built through presence. The kind of presence that does not panic when it is misunderstood, does not rush to defend every action, and does not collapse under questioning. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most. A person who is anchored within themselves does not depend on external approval to remain steady. Because they understand something simple: you are not defined by how often you are understood. You are defined by how consistently you remain true to yourself. And once you reach that place, you no longer argue for respect. You embody it, quietly, consistently, without effort. Not because people finally agreed with you, but because you stopped needing them to. That is the final lesson of Stoicism. Strength is not found in explanation. It is found in self-mastery. So the next time you feel the urge to defend a decision that needs no defense, pause. Let the silence remain where the explanation once lived. Because somewhere between the need to justify yourself and the discipline to let your actions speak is the version of you that no longer needs permission to be respected. If this message resonated with you, continue walking this path with us. There is much more wisdom ahead. Until next time, protect your peace, guard your character, and remember, the strongest person in the room is rarely the one speaking the most. It is the one who no longer feels the need to explain who they are.